Welcome back to Utility Sports, and I'm really excited for today's video. We are covering Scoot Henderson in a scouting profile. And for those of you who keep up with the NBA draft, you guys know I spend so much time watching these players, and I'm sure you guys have all seen Scoot Henderson play, at least on TV, if not live in person. And he is a special talent and one I'm really excited to talk about in this video. A player who, well, spoiler here, could have been the #1 overall pick in a variety of draft classes over the last 5 to 10 years. I don't think he'll be the #1 draft pick this year, obviously, with Victor Wembanyama in the class, but I'm really excited to break down his game, things he does well. We're going to nitpick a little bit and point out some things he doesn't do super great, and we're going to use a lot of film to talk about why I think he's such a good player and elements where he's really improved in the last 12 months and some of the things that he's just gotten really good at. Naturally, just based on who he is as a player and some of the gifts that he, is given to him that he just naturally has in terms of athleticism and stuff like that. So let's go ahead, look at a video preview here. As always, in these scouting profiles, we'll start with a player profile, really outline who the player is from a physical standpoint, and maybe take a look at some of their most recent statistics. The strengths of the player, that's really the most important part, and that's what the front offices will sell themselves on. They're going to look at how a player can help them win and how those strengths outlie against some of those weaknesses. For me, the weaknesses here, again, I'm nitpicking on Scoot Henderson. I don't think there are a ton of weaknesses, but I think there are some that are worth noting on why, as a draft prospect, he isn't going to be the #1 overall pick this year. Again, just nitpicking him a little bit as a player. Then the player comparison and franchise value, something new I want to talk about. I want to talk about what he can be to a franchise, and then giving a player comparison to him, I think, is going to give a pretty good recommendation to the viewers on how do I view this player? What do I think he can become at the NBA level? I have a really good player comparison for him, one that I think is a pretty high standard to put him against, but I think he can get to it. And then for the draft range, we're going to talk about where I expect him to go on draft night. For a player like him, the draft range is pretty simple. In future scouting profiles, obviously, there's going to be a little bit of a wider range. But then also, I'm going to talk about where I think he might end up playing to be in terms of true talent in the class. Do I think he's going to be a top 3 player in the class? How good do I think he is compared to other players in the draft class? Of course, I've spent so many hours watching all of the players already. This is the furthest along I've ever been at this point of the process in terms of my understanding of the draft class as a whole and what most of these players can offer. Obviously, there's things I'm going to learn. Things will change throughout the college season. At this point I'm recording, no one's even played a college game yet. So the guys who I'm looking at, maybe 3, 4, 5 in the class right now in terms of projected draft slot, well, those players might play terribly and fall. Those players might play exceptionally and rise. I really don't know at this point how they're going to play. Of course, I have my best guesses, but sometimes players don't live up to what you're expecting, or sometimes they overachieve. So again, it's going to be a little bit of a rough draft here because the players haven't played in college yet, but we have seen Scoot Henderson this year, which is really all that matters for my scouting profile at this point. So let's go ahead and jump into that player profile. Scoot Henderson, he's only 18 years old. He turns 19 February 3rd in 2023. So you're looking at a really young player. He's going to be 19 years old and 4 months at the day of the draft. And that's going to be good value for a team. You're getting a really young point guard who I think can do a lot of good things for you. He's 6'3", so pretty typical height there for a point guard at the NBA level. 6'3", prototypical, I would say 195 pounds. So he's got a pretty good frame on him. You look at his body type, even the picture on the screen right now, he's a big, strong point guard. Even though he's not massive in terms of height, he's not like Luka Doncic big. He's going to be able to run through guys. He's not going to get super bothered by help defense as much as some smaller guards would. He's well built. He's taking care of his body. And I think at this point you could say that he's a professional level player. He's been playing at the pro level for G League Ignite now for a year, and I think he's going to get even stronger, even better this year. And then by the time he finally plays an NBA game, which will be October of 2023, he'll be ready to shine. So I'm excited for that. Then remember, he plays for G League Ignite last year for them. 14.3 points per game, 4.8 rebounds per game, 4.2 assists per game, and his shooting splits were a little lower than maybe you would hope. 44.9% from the field, 21.6% from 3, and a little bit under 78% from the line. Obviously, there's some excitement there. A lot of people believe free throw shooting is a good indicator for actual three-point shot success for the future. I'm a little bit less in that camp. I do think that, hey, a good free throw shooter is more likely to be a good shooter in general, but it doesn't mean it's a guarantee. That 3-point shooting percentage is alarming, but we're going to talk about why I actually think he's improving in that area in this video as well. So let's get into it. What are the strengths that I want to talk about? First of all, and these are the most important ones because this is the basis of his entire game: ball handling and athleticism. These two components really make up 90% of his game. Without these two areas, Scoot Henderson would not be an NBA level player, believe it or not. Despite how good he is at a lot of other things, these are the two main factors into what makes him a really good basketball player. Let's talk about the athleticism first. At 6'3", typically, if you're not super athletic, you're going to be a below the rim finisher, someone who you have to be a little bit more crafty, dynamic. You have to really utilize each and every step that you take super well. When you're athletic and you have the burst like Scoot Henderson does, the vertical explosiveness that he does, it lets you get away with more things. You don't have to be as perfect consistently to get to your spots, to win matchups, to beat guys off the dribble. You know, compare him to a Jalen Brunson. Jalen Brunson's so good with his footwork, getting up and under opponents, finding little cracks and crevices in the defense because he has to. If he didn't do those things, he wouldn't be in the NBA. And for Scoot Henderson, it's kind of the opposite here. He has the athleticism. He is able to take advantage of that athleticism consistently, but the footwork's not terrible either, which we're going to talk about. And that's why the ball handling aspect is super important here as well. At certain moments, it looks like he has the ball on a string. He's very crafty and creative himself. I just praised Jalen Brunson for that. Scoot Henderson's got some creativity in his game as well as a ball handler. And you're going to see it in some of the clips that I do show here. Of course, I think the most famous one, which you're going to see on the screen now, is that little crafty pick and roll maneuver where he brings the ball kind of like on a yo-yo behind his back, through the legs, back out in front of him to get to his spot and then get downhill, and a phenomenal finish, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit as well. Scoot Henderson, again, the ball handling is very vital for him because it lets him get to his spots, and the athleticism lets him take advantage of getting to those spots and get to those spots quicker, be less contested when he gets there, and put himself in a position where he's going to have open space ahead of him. And when you have a player as talented as Scoot Henderson, with as much space in front of him as he can create just by simply beating guys off the dribble regularly, that is super important. You guys know last year I talked about Jaden Ivey a ton and why I really liked his game. These were two of the elements: ball handling, athleticism. If you have a guard who can beat guys off the dribble 90% of the time, or even 50% of the time, you're setting yourself up to win a ton of games. Modern day NBA is about drive and kick. If you can get to the lane, get 2 feet in the paint, force help rotations, get teams out of their shell defense, you're going to win. That's quite frankly how NBA basketball works at this point. It's all about beating the guy in front of you, forcing a second guy to come to you. And the moment you do that, if you're able to make the right decision, whether that means taking advantage of a late rotation and scoring, which we see Scoot Henderson do all the time, or making the right kick, again, that's how you beat teams. You draw 2 to the ball, you kick it out, and you get open shots. That's what Scoot Henderson does well. And with the clips you're seeing on the screen, the ball handling is evident. He's actually very hardworking as well, which is one thing I want to talk about here. I'm going to show a clip of him doing a little bit of a practice workout, and this is something he regularly does. It's actually a pretty common practice for most guards at the NBA level. Basically, it's just doing a little dip reset here off of a between the legs cross, where you're going to see he does it back-to-back times and then gets a shot up. And what he's really working on here is ball familiarity. He wants to get very comfortable with dribbling between his legs and get very comfortable working in certain situations. There's a lot of different ways to do this drill. It doesn't have to be between your legs. It could be off of crossovers. And he's just basically practicing gathering the basketball and getting really used to the way that the basketball feels while performing certain dribbling moves, which overall helps your ball handling. The more reps you can get, the better. And this is one thing that I really think about Scoot Henderson. He's gotten so much better within the last 12 months from when I first watched him for G League Ignite nearly 12 months ago to where he's currently at right now as a player. It's a night and day difference. It really is. We're going to have some other clips later on in the video that talks about how he's improved so much. And I think that practice clip is a big reason why he is consistently working on his game. You know, everyone loves to talk about potential as an age thing. Oh, if he's only 18, he's got so much potential. Yes and no. Obviously, an 18-year-old can get a lot better, but it requires the hard work to do it. And I think Scoot Henderson is really putting in that hard work. You can see him improve as a player. Every time I watch him, he looks like he's learned something new, slightly improved something, tightened up certain elements to his game. And I'm really excited about the future for this kid because of some of those things. I feel like he's taking his game really serious. I think he's taking his body very seriously. And because of that, I think he's going to find a lot of success at the NBA level, which now, based off ball handling and athleticism, let's go to probably his most apparent strength to most people, which is his finishing. And it is phenomenal. He is a great finisher in two different ways. He's a finesse finisher and he's also a power finisher, which is what makes him special here at 6'3". Let's contrast him again to a guy like Jalen Brunson. Jalen Brunson is not a power finisher, right? Jalen Brunson is going to finish pretty much all of his shots at the rim below the rim. Scoot Henderson doesn't have to do that. We saw his athleticism on display in an earlier clip. Let's look at it again here. He explodes through the lane and he's able to punch home dunks in transition. He's somebody, if the defense is lacking in help rotation, or if you're playing a team that doesn't have a great rim protector, Scoot Henderson is going to consistently punish you at the rim because he's just, quite frankly, athletic enough to do that. He can get his head up toward the rim, and once he does that, he's going to probably punch one home on you. He's kind of like a little bit of a laid-back Ja Morant in terms of the athleticism. He's not quite as bouncy. Ja Morant's probably one of the most bouncy athletic players I've ever seen play the game of basketball. I don't think Scoot has that level of athleticism, but when he's finishing, he can definitely get up there and slam it with the best of them. And I think he's really special with that regard. And then let's focus on the finesse finishing. And I think this is really what makes him special as a finisher. Obviously, the power finishing is fun. It's awesome to see a transition dunk. But finesse finishing all requires one word, and I talked about it with Jaden Ivey last year a lot, and I think that Scoot Henderson is actually significantly better at this even than Jaden Ivey, and it's the word concentration. Concentration is extremely important, especially at the NBA level for young, smaller guards, and Scoot Henderson checks all those boxes right now. 18 years old, only 6'3". He's going to have to finish at the rim, and the reason why he's going to be so good at finishing at the rim is because of that concentration. I was super impressed in their two scrimmage games against the Metropolitans 92, where Victor Wembanyama at 7'4" would come over to play some help side defense, and Scoot Henderson seemed unbothered by that. And concentration, again, is the big reason why. I'm going to show some clips here with him finishing at the rim, and I'm going to try to put some pauses in here with him and his eye level. Notice he is specifically looking at the rim. He feels the help defender. He knows where the help defender is in his peripherals, but he's not focused on avoiding the shot blocker. He's focused on finishing the layup or the floater, whatever it is. He's focused on the rim. He gets his eyes up. He knows where the basket is. And it seems like a really simple thing, but it's actually super vital for a player like him having good survivability in the NBA. And in fact, Scoot Henderson can do more than survive in the NBA. He's going to thrive in the NBA because of this. He's not going to be bothered by length. If you see a 7'4" guy in Victor Wembanyama with 8'1" wingspan and you're unbothered by that, I think you're going to adjust to the NBA pretty darn well. Benedict Mathurin was also really good at this last year. And again, I think Scoot Henderson's even better at it right now. Just again, I'm going to show a variety of clips here. He reads the defense. He feels the help. But again, I'm going to pause it on the eye level. He's looking at the rim. He knows where he's at in relation to space and timing and where he's at with the rim. All those things are super important for becoming a good NBA player, especially as a guard. And I think Scoot Henderson checks all those boxes. And this comes back to his ball handling too. Part of why he's able to finish, he's able to create space off the dribble. He's able to get downhill, beat people downhill. There's the athleticism profile as well. Part of it, like I said, ball handling and athleticism open up his entire game. It lets him get to his spots on the floor. It lets him beat his guy off the dribble. It puts the defense in help rotation. And once you're there, once you beat your guy, you're playing basically 5-on-4 basketball, and you're going to have a lot of success doing that. And when you have a player like Scoot Henderson who can consistently generate those opportunities, that's why you have a good player and probably a good team. It's like what Luka Doncic does for the Dallas Mavericks. Consistently can beat his guy, not necessarily just downhill, but with a variety of ball moves, ball fakes. He sets himself up to play 5-on-4 basketball regularly, which is why he's such a good isolation player. Scoot Henderson has some of those elements as well. Again, probably a little bit more fast twitch than Luka Doncic. I don't think anyone's surprised by that. Maybe not the whole bevy of ball fakes quite yet, but he has some of those things. He's got some good footwork, and you're going to see that in some of the clips here as well, where he's maneuvering in space. He's getting to a spot where he can use the rim to protect himself from a shot blocker, using the rim as basically a barrier to the shot blocker's arm coming through to go get the basketball. You also see him understanding, hey, a 7'4" guy here is probably going to want to block my shot and really send a statement. Let me hit him with a quick little stride stop. And he's actually athletic enough where he doesn't even have to do the full spin. He just actually drags his foot back and gets a nice layup. And it's crazy. Look at this as well. Victor Wembanyama nearly blocked that shot, which is why Wembanyama is such a special player in his own right. And it's hard to not compare these two because this is the most recent game between those two guys, right? You want to look at them. There's going to be so much conversation around these two about pick one, pick two, who's going where, all of that. Both of them are so special. And it was such a treat getting to watch these two play each other in 2 games. Obviously, a bummer that Scoot Henderson missed a good majority of that second game. But we saw enough in the first game. It was one of the best games I've ever seen, including, NBA Finals games, whatever. It was such a show. And anyone who was there was super lucky to be in attendance and even watch on TV. Well worth the time. If you guys haven't watched that, again, you're getting to see a lot of the clips now. Scoot Henderson is a special player. So is Victor Wembanyama. And focusing on Scoot here, another thing he's special at is the shot making element to his game. Specifically, I'm talking about perimeter scoring and how does he really operate as a scorer when he's not getting to the rim. Now, again, I think he can get to the rim whenever he wants, but it's always great to have a counter move. And part of the reason why is, let's say he's trying to drive to his right or left, and the defender's kind of step for step with him. If you can all of a sudden step on the brakes and hit a mid-range pull-up jump shot, you become virtually unguardable when you are more athletic than your opponent. I think about all the time when I play, if I'm facing somebody who's more athletic than me, the one thing I want them to do, I want them to try to drive to the rim because that's the way I'm playing them. I'm trying to meet them at the rim because I know that's what their advantage is over me. And a lot of scouting reports will say, do not let him get to the rim. Try and cut him off out in space. And the moment when you do that, if he knows what you're trying to stop him from doing, and he can counter it with a little stop and pop midi, or a step back mid-range jump shot, or a step back 3-pointer, you're kind of at the mercy of whether he's making shots or not, because it's going to be hard to beat him when he's getting to the rim whenever he wants. So that's going to be the first step in your scouting report is, hey, I want to stop this guy from getting to the rack. And if he can beat you off of ways when he's not getting to the rack and really playing off of what you're giving him, that's going to be tough. And we saw that in a pretty good situation against Victor Wembanyama in the Mets 92 a lot, where he was able to manipulate the pick and roll, and against drop coverage was very comfortable hitting those pull-up jump shots at 15 to 18 feet. Also look at a clip from last year too, where again, he gets advantage off the left wing here, and he steps in and he hits a little 16-foot jump shot. That is extremely valuable for a player like him. Think Chris Paul. Chris Paul made a living off of that jump shot that Scoot Henderson just showcased that he can make, and he makes it consistently. And he actually looks much better at it at this point than he even did a year ago. So I think there's a lot of potential here. I think there's a lot of upside for him as well as a shot maker. And of course, the one that went really viral, let's see him out in space with Victor Wembanyama one-on-one. And Wembanyama has to respect that athleticism again. You see how far off he's playing him. And Scoot Henderson knows this. So Scoot Henderson gets into his bag a little bit, puts on a show, dances around him a little, and then he hits that nice step back jump shot. Wembanyama so lengthy, almost gets to it, but he's got the skill set to make some of those tough shots. I don't love that he would shoot them a ton, but having them in your back pocket for when you need them, like in this situation, it's a positive. You want to be able to make those shots, and we've seen that Scoot Henderson can, in fact, make those shots, which makes him such a good, dynamic, offensive player, not only because he can make those shots, but because he's such a threat to get to the rim. It all plays off of each other, which makes him such a complete player. And when we're talking about how complete of a player he is, this is the element where he has taken the biggest stride in the last 12 months, in my opinion, and it's his facilitating, his playmaking. For those of you who do not speak other languages, the word fácil in Spanish is easy. And that's what facilitating does, is it makes the job of all of your teammates much easier. Scoot Henderson is capable of doing that as well, and he got a lot better at it as well. When he's able to get downhill, he has eyes open. He can make the right pass. And you'll see it a lot in a lot of these clips I show you here. It's all about drive and kick, like we talked about earlier. Get 2 feet in the paint or right around the paint, draw and help defense, and make the right pass. And Scoot Henderson not only does that, he's also capable now of reading the defense and maybe making a more difficult pass than he would have a year ago. I'll show a clip here now as well from last season with G League Ignite. You see him working off the top of the key, starts to a little dribble at action to the left wing, and the guy hits a back cut on what is a pretty common dribble at action. You'll either get a dribble handoff there or a back cut to kind of open up spacing there. It puts the defender there who's guarding the cutter in a really tough spot to either deny the ball or to get beat on a back cut. You know, it's a tough spot. That's why it's pretty common in a lot of NBA basketball and to be honest, lower level basketball as well. And Scoot Henderson kind of picks up the ball. He's reading the defense and he does make the right read here, but it looks a little awkward, right? Hopefully you'll see that I froze it there for you to kind of point out where the help defender is. And then he makes the right pass to the corner on a skip and gets his team an open look. Unfortunately, Beauchamp misses, but again, it's a nice read here. Go now into this next game. And this is one that if you really know basketball, this is like the savant level play from Scoot Henderson. This was, in my opinion, the best play he made this entire game for G League Ignite in the first matchup against Mets 92. He's working off the left wing. He gets downhill and he makes a one-handed skip pass right on the money to John Jenkins for 3. Probably one of the most phenomenal passes I've seen from a young guard prior to making it into the NBA. And that's a very high level read, and it's a really tough pass to pull off and execute, especially one-handed like that on a bullet pass, looking like he's a center fielder in the MLB type of throw. It's unbelievable. And I'm really excited about his ability to facilitate. There's going to be plenty of clips in here that you see of him, again, just drawing the defense in, kicking out. I think one thing he's got to be careful of is leaving his feet. And the one thing I also want to see from him, I want to see him pass with a little bit more anticipation. I think that one-handed pass to John Jenkins is a good example of anticipation. Again, you know, he's anticipating that help defense in the pick and roll tag situation, which is really good. Something I don't think he was doing as much last year with only 4.2 assists. This year for the G League Ignite team, I think he's capable of averaging upwards of 7 assists a game if he's getting enough shot making around him. And part of the reason why is the anticipation. We saw it a little bit more. I still think that there is a little bit more room for him to grow, but in transition or just going downhill, you can tell he's quickly reading the defense and anticipating what's going to be open. For example, here he gets a drive toward the right block. Wembanyama steps up, little dump off pass. He anticipates Wembanyama's help and just leaves a nice little shuttle pass for an easy layup. Another one here in transition where he's coming up the floor and he actually has a big running down the middle with him. And he fits a really nice tight pocket pass. That is a great example of precision, accuracy, and also anticipation there. Knowing that that passing lane was going to open up at that exact moment and putting it right on the money. Very impressive. And then you're also going to see a pick and roll one here. Nice little pocket pass on a bounce. And yes, Victor Wembanyama erases the shot, gets back in the play and makes a really nice block. That's a great highlight for Victor Wembanyama. This is also a really great highlight for Scoot Henderson. That is a tough pass to execute, especially in a tight pick and roll like that against NBA level competition or, you know, at least professional level competition. Scoot Henderson was extremely impressive to start the year in those exhibition games, and there's a lot to build off of as well. One of my favorite things about Scoot Henderson is the passion that he plays with, and he's a box office type of player. Think John Morant here as well. Everyone wants to turn on the TV when John Morant's on the game. You want to do the same thing when Scoot Henderson's in. You want to watch this kid play basketball, and it's not just because of how talented he is. He's just fun to watch because he loves the game. And this is one of the things I think really separates him from most NBA draft prospects. I really think he's dedicated to getting better. Obviously, I don't know him personally, don't have personal conversations with him, but I can see the progression month to month, year to year. And I typically, you know, you can see players getting better, but I think he's really accelerated his improvement a ton. And, you know, I thought Scoot Henderson was going to be a top 5 pick for sure coming into the year. I didn't necessarily believe he was a lock to be number 2. I was anticipating that he could be number 2, but I wasn't locked in on that. At this point now, it's hard to bet against him being the 2nd overall pick because of how much he's improved. And teams are going to want to have him in terms of jersey sales, People are going to buy tickets to watch this guy play. I will. I'm going to go to games whenever he's in town, basically, is my MO here now with him. I want to watch this kid play basketball, and I love that. It's not necessarily a real strength in terms of how is he going to make his team better, but in some ways it is, right? Teams are going to rally around him. Teams are going to love how hard he tries in games. He wanted the show to be about him when facing Wembanyama. Both of these two players are awesome young players, and I love their personalities. Victor Wembanyama saying, "Oh, I think Scoot would be a great number one pick if I was never born." That's like an all-time quote. And Scoot Henderson, really went out and tried to take that number one pick from him. And both of them played so great. So I'm really excited about the future of the NBA just with these two guys. Even if the draft class was only 2 people, I'd be excited. And the draft class is super deep this year, and there's a ton of other great talent. And I think it's even top heavy still with how deep it is. There's still so many great top end players. So I'm very excited about this draft class in general. So let's get into some of those weaknesses and some of the reasons why he's not a perfect prospect and why I don't think he'll be the first overall pick. Size and defense, those are 2 things that are big contributors to the reason why, especially when you compare him to Victor Wembanyama. I think this graphic on the screen really sums it up perfectly. I know the graphic here is a little blurry. This is the best image I could get of it. Wembanyama is like fully crouched over, and they're about the same height. That is one of the reasons why Victor Wembanyama will be the first overall pick. You just don't pass on a 7'4" guy for a 6'3" guard. It never happens. Yao Ming was the first overall pick. Victor Wembanyama is going to be the first overall pick. And then because of that, defensively, there's just less upside here for Scoot. He's a little bit smaller. Yes, he's athletic, but I also think he's a little bit prone to defensive lapses at times. Now, I think he's a defensive playmaker. He's going to get in the passing lanes. He's going to make some stuff happen. And it's not like he's a terrible defender, but I just don't think he's going to be like an all-world defender where Victor Wembanyama could arguably be an all-defense candidate within his second year in the league. That's, the real difference here. Wembanyama, there's been so many moments where he's, had 8 blocks in a huge game. Think about FIBA U19 World Cup championship game against Team USA. He had 20 points, over 20 points, and he had 8 blocks against Chet Holmgren, Jaden Ivey, Mike Miles, a ton of players who are either in the NBA now or will be in the NBA. Victor Wembanyama showed out against all of those guys, and they were all on one team. So there's, again, we're nitpicking here. I still think Scoot Henderson's an awesome prospect, but he's not perfect as a prospect because there's certain elements that, hey, maybe he's just not as great at, and it's hard to be a perfect prospect. I would argue Victor Wembanyama is not a perfect prospect, although he's pretty darn close to it. Scoot Henderson, I think, a little bit of a ways away from being a perfect prospect, but he's still a really, really darn good one. And then we go into the perimeter consistency, and this is one that on given nights, again, this is nitpicky here. I don't think that this is a serious problem, but just with the way he plays, some of those mid-range shots, it does lean itself into some difficulty in terms of efficiency at times. We saw that with his G League numbers from last year, only about 44% from the field, 21% from 3. Those are some red flags, obviously, when you look at the numbers holistically. Again, when you watch the film, I'm not actually super worried about it, but I think there are going to be nights where he, goes 3 of 12 or 4 of 17, which is going to play into kind of who the comp is for him a little bit. I think he's better than the comparison, though. I'm going to spoil that a little bit. But the perimeter consistency, I think on certain nights he'll struggle just because he's a little bit smaller, and his shot selection, he's going to have to take some tougher shots than most players, but he's going to be very efficient still. Given the type of shots he takes, I just don't think he'll be as efficient as, some of the premier players we've seen in the history of the NBA, looking at like LeBron James. Victor Wembanyama is going to be extremely efficient, I would believe. You think about Nikola Jokic. A lot of players in the league are just supremely efficient. It's kind of like the James Harden thing right here. Like, Harden for his career is like a 35% three-point shooter. If you had him taking the type of shots that, say, Kyle Korver shot in his career, he would probably shoot north of 40% from 3. But when you're shooting step backs and, contested mid-range jump shots, those kind of things, you're naturally going to be a little bit less efficient. Again, not a big red flag for me, but just something to monitor, I would say. So now my player comp and franchise value for Scoot Henderson. My comp, kind of think Anthony Edwards, but better. Think of him as like a true point guard who actually feels the game. My biggest complaint about Anthony Edwards the last 3 years now is he just doesn't feel the game. He doesn't see all the passing lanes. He doesn't see all the passing angles, doesn't have the best vision. And there's certain times where he just doesn't make the right play. He's going to put up a shot. He's going to dribble the air out of the ball a little bit. And he wants to be the guy, and he wants to put on a show. And it's awesome for Minnesota. I think the Timberwolves have a great young player with him. I still think he's one of the 40 best players in the world right now. I'm not knocking Anthony Edwards here. I'm just saying Scoot Henderson's better. Scoot Henderson is a little bit smaller, not as muscular, not as strong, but I think he's just as quick. I think he's maybe right now more vertically explosive because Anthony Edwards has been dealing with that knee issue. And I think that also he's probably a little bit more reliable as a shooter, and he's a better passer. So you guys can tell I really like Scoot Henderson a lot. I think Scoot Henderson is going to be a phenomenal young player in the league, and I think he can be a franchise-changing guard, which you can see my value here. A championship caliber point guard, that's hard to do. It's hard to be a championship caliber anything, let alone point guard. That's the hardest thing to be in the NBA, is to be a championship caliber point guard. You know, we see the Luka Doncic's of the world be that. John Morant right now is that. Stephen Curry's that. Those are kind of the 3 point guards right now in the league that I would say are true championship caliber point guards. You know, Damian Lillard, maybe he's kind of on the cusp of that. But Scoot Henderson's got pretty much all the talent you need in the world. Now, does it mean he's going to win championships? No, that's going to be dependent on who his GM and coach put around him, the type of styles that they run, and if they can just win games when it really matters the most. But Scoot Henderson, I mean, if his team never wins, it's not because it's his fault, right? As long as he stays healthy, knock on wood, he's going to be in the conversation for a lot of awards. He's going to be a multi-time All-Star. He's going to be probably multi-time All-NBA even, I would argue. At least one-time All-NBA, I would have to guess at this point. That's a very tough group to get into. It means you're a top 6 guard in the league. Again, very difficult to even make All-NBA third team, which some people scoff at. That's a very, very good award to be a part of. And Scoot Henderson, I think, is going to be in the conversation for some of those awards. So he's a great young player and someone I'm really excited to watch at the NBA level. So my draft range now, this is the final part of the video. On draft night, Scoot Henderson is going to be 2nd overall. He's going to be drafted by whatever team doesn't get the first pick, and that's because Victor Wembanyama is a lock to be number 1. Now, for realistic true value, I really like Scoot Henderson. It's just a little early right now. Again, I'm recording this before the end of October. No college games have even started yet. We're about 10 days away from that. I still think he's likely the 2nd best player in the class. It's very rare that in a draft class, the best player and the 2nd best player happen to have gone number 1 and number 2 overall. It just typically actually doesn't happen that frequently, despite what common belief is that, hey, if you have a top 2 pick, you're going to be good. You know, it tends to not work out that way. I think maybe the most recent example that will is Zion Williamson, John Morant, but I would argue John Morant's better than Zion in a lot of ways. But I think that those two are close at least. And here, I think that it's still possible that it would be Wembanyama, Scoot Henderson as the 2 best players in the class. But I want to see more from Amen Thompson, who's playing for Overtime Elite. I think that there's some serious upside there if he can figure out the shot. And Dariq Whitehead as well. And I know that's going to be surprising to some people. He was National Player of the Year last year at the high school level. He's a phenomenal shooter, both off the move and off the catch. And I think he's somebody who, if he gets in the right situation, gives him a little bit of time to develop, maybe he really pops off and becomes some great wing who could be a franchise changer as well. But like I said, again, I think Scoot Henderson is, at this point, clearly the 2nd best player in the draft. If I had to post my final mock draft, my final big board right now, he'd be number 2 in both of those things. And I'd feel really confident in that. There's a lot that can change. Again, I want to see Dariq Whitehead play some college basketball for Duke. I want to see Amen Thompson play more this year for Overtime Elite. And I'm excited to see what Scoot Henderson looks like this year for G League Ignite, right? There's a lot that can change, but as of right now, that's really where I'm at. I feel very confident in that as well. Thank you all so much for watching. Hopefully you did enjoy this video on Scoot Henderson. Make sure to leave a like and let me know your thoughts on Henderson in the comment section as well. I'd love to hear what you think about him as a player, as a prospect. Where do you want him to go? Tell me if your favorite teams may be in the running for Scoot Henderson. Thanks everyone so much for watching, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.